What's up guys, Mike here, and sorry for this weird camera angle, sorry for everything about this. Right now I'm at my parents' house, so I'm not at my usual setup, but none of that really matters because today we are talking about one of the most important issues in the NBA today. We are looking at the one problem that has the chance to ruin the future of the NBA. It's something that the league needs to address right now. So I'm not gonna waste any more time with this face cam, let's just jump right into the video. Before we begin this video, we need to look at one set of numbers, a collection of stats that is the complete basis for this video. I spent hours looking at countless playoff teams' rosters, counting just how many true starters missed at least one playoff game with injury. In the 2015 and 2016 NBA playoffs, the league saw a ridiculous 31 starters from playoff teams miss at least one playoff game. If you compare those numbers to 10 years ago, where we only had 18, 20 years ago, where we only had 12, and 30 years ago, where we only had 16, you can see that this absurd amount of injuries to playoff starters is a new trend, and it's clearly a huge problem. But before we really jump into these numbers, let's backtrack a bit. Let's take this story to a meaningless game in December, a random matchup between the Cleveland Cavaliers and the Memphis Grizzlies that should not have been significant, but it was. Because on this day, the Cavs took the floor without their three best players, as LeBron James, Kevin Love, and Kyrie Irving did not make the trip to Memphis and instead stayed back in Cleveland, as coach Tyronn Lue chose to rest his three stars instead of playing them on a back-to-back. And while you may think this is no big deal, you have to consider the potential future of this type of decision. Now, I want to emphasize the word future here, as when looking throughout the course of NBA history, resting players during the season is a relatively new idea. This trend was of course introduced to the rest of the league through coaching legend Greg Popovich, who has proven again and again to be ahead of the curve. For years, Pop has managed his stars' minutes and given them games off when he felt they needed it, but it was in November of 2012 when this strategy really began to make headlines and cause controversy. At the end of a long road trip, Pop sent his stars home instead of playing them in a game against the Heat. For this action, the Spurs were fined $250,000 due to a disservice to the league, as Pop kept his intentions to send his players home a secret until game time. Now, we really have to look at this fine and ask ourselves, is resting players really a disservice to the league, or is it just a strategic choice for teams looking to rest their players during the season? Well, the NBA certainly does not think teams should ever rest players. They want their stars to play in every game they possibly can, and past NBA legends agree with this sentiment. In response to his thoughts on resting players, listen as Kevin McHale says,
"This rest stuff just drives me crazy. I never got tired in a game. How can you get tired in a game? You're playing basketball. I don't understand this."
Which are some strong words from an NBA Hall of Fame, and I do understand the league's point of view here. For one thing, the league suffers when star players sit because people will simply be less interested in the game, especially when that game is on national television. While we, the diehard fans of the NBA, see national TV games during the season as just another opportunity to catch some basketball, the league sees national TV games as a way to showcase their sport to people across the world. The NBA is in a never-ending competition for support with the NFL, MLB, and global soccer leagues, which means that every national television game is important. It's a way for the league to keep its current fans invested in the season, as well as a way to draw in new fans to the sport. If the NBA finds itself in a situation like November 29th, 2012, where the Spurs sat their stars in a national televised matchup on TNT against the Heat with LeBron, Wade, and Bosh playing, then the league misses their chance to generate interest in the product they're selling, which, to put it bluntly, sucks for the NBA. But the league is run by billionaires, right? Who cares if they miss out on a few bucks? The problem, though, is that this doesn't just affect the league, it affects us fans. For most of us, a few star players sitting out a random regular season game is no big deal. But we have to consider this poster, this fan of the Cavaliers. This guy traveled 4 hours and spent $800 to watch his favorite team, who should have been led by LeBron James, take the court against the Memphis Grizzlies. And while this guy is a symbol of the problem, let's switch sports for a second. When asked why he busted his ass down the line on every routine ground ball, Yankee legend Joe DiMaggio responded, "There is always some kid who may be seeing me for the first or last time. I owe him my best." And to me, that statement is very powerful. Just think of all the people in the building that night in Memphis who bought tickets with the belief that they were going to see LeBron for the first time. Instead, these same fans watched a game that saw DeAndre Liggins, Mike Dunleavy, and Channing Frye battle it out against JaMychal Green, Andrew Harrison, and Troy Williams. Everyone who was at this game, including the man with the poster, was robbed of an NBA experience they should have had, which to me is the real problem problem here. When NBA stars rest, it's the fans who suffer the most. But here's the thing. As you can see, the title of this video is the NBA's biggest problem that no one is talking about. And at this point, it might seem that the league's biggest problem is teams resting players. But really, resting players is just a byproduct of a bigger problem. And that problem is that in the modern NBA, an 82-game regular season is just too long. Right now, you may be thinking the NBA has always played 82 games and they've never had a problem with that before. So why is this a problem now? The answer to this comes in two parts. For one thing, as modern athletes have evolved, an NBA basketball game has become increasingly more stressful on the players' bodies. With modern innovations in things such as weight training, basketball players have evolved into superior physical specimens. Just look at the difference between the muscle mass on Isaiah, Bird, and Kareem compared to that of Westbrook, LeBron, and Dwight. Sure, 20 years ago, NBA players played an all-around rougher style of play, but that doesn't mean the game is any less physical now. Which means when you add on this increased athletic ability, the NBA has seen a lot more wear and tear to its players. The other current problem with the new modern NBA comes with social media. That might sound crazy, but you need to remember that much of the rough style of play we finally look back to in the old NBA took place during the playoffs. However, we also need to remember that just a few years ago, the NBA had a horrible reputation for players simply not trying on defense. That's because back then players coasted during the regular season. But now that's changed, as in today's NBA, if at any time a player isn't playing defense, isn't giving it their all, they run the risk of being heavily criticized on social media, or worse, ending up on fail segments such as Shaqtin' a Fool. And trust me, the players care about these things. And how could they not, as what grown man wants to watch Shaq rip into him on national television? And if you're not convinced by my answers to these problems, you still have to admit, there is a problem. The proof is right here in front of us. Players are getting injured more and more often, and stars are missing more and more playoff games. It's just that simple. And let's specifically look at the Spurs numbers the last 2 years. Notice how they have 0 injuries? That's not a coincidence. Which begs the question, what can the NBA do to stop this from happening? Now, to find an answer here, we need to realize that the real problem with an 82-game schedule comes in the form of back-to-back games. As it stands right now, back-to-back games are killing NBA players. The stress that a single NBA game puts on a man is enormous, and asking players to put this stress on their bodies on back-to-back nights is simply unfair. Now, the NBA has actively worked to cut this number down, but teams are still averaging 16.3 back-to-back games in the 2017 season, which means that almost 20% of their games take place on back-to-back nights. That's a problem, as back-to-backs lead to more injuries and also to a competitive imbalance in the league. This season, the Thunder only have 13 back-to-backs while the Hawks have 19, giving Atlanta a clear disadvantage before the season even starts. And while I have been speaking a lot about this problem, don't worry, I do have 2 solutions for Adam Silver to consider to fix this. The first is the simplest, a shortened 66-game NBA season. Now, some fans might be hesitant to support this idea, as 16 less games a year will mess up the NBA in terms of historic numbers. This isn't baseball though, where numbers such as 3,000 hits and 500 home runs are sacred. In basketball, all-time numbers are nowhere near as important. Could you tell me right now who is number 4 on the all-time rebounds list? I know I had to look it up, and the answer is Elvin Hayes. So yeah, a 66-game season might mean that all-time numbers are going to get screwed up, but really, who cares? For one thing, I'll gladly trade a change in all-time numbers if it means that star players actually play in every game they can, especially in the playoffs. I mean, in 2015, we already saw LeBron take a 2-week break and miss 8 games in the process. Trust me, expect that trend to continue and maybe even get worse in the future. But look, I am a realist. I understand that the NBA is not going to switch to a 66-game schedule because they would simply lose out on 16 games of revenue. Which brings us to my second solution, a modified NBA schedule. Right now, the NBA squeezes in 82 games in just 164 days, which means it's a guarantee that teams will play multiple back-to-backs throughout the year. However, if we made just a few changes, we could drastically cut back on that 16.3 number. For one thing, this year's training camp began on September 27th and the preseason ran from October 1st to October 21st. Then the season started on the 25th, which means that in 21 days, teams played in only 7 games, giving us a clear chance to space out the NBA year. It's really simple, just push back training camp to September 16th, start the preseason on the 20th, and have teams only play in 4 preseason games in 12 days. And I don't want to hear it, NBA leaders, the guys trained the whole offseason, they don't need 7 preseason games as a warm-up. And in terms of lost lost revenue for the missing 3 preseason games. Guess what? You'll make up that revenue when your star players are not missing games in the playoffs and instead are actually playing. Anyway, that would mean that the season would now start on October 4th. We're only giving teams 2 days off between the end of the preseason and the start of the regular season. Because why do they need 3? They don't. And already starting the season on the 4th gives us an extra 21 days to stretch out the NBA season, but we're not done yet. Looking at the end of the 2017 NBA season, right now the playoffs begin on April 15th and Game 7 of the NBA Finals would take place on June 18th. From there, based on last season's off-season schedule, the draft would take place on June 22nd, free agency would begin on June 30th, and the Summer League would end on July 17th. And due to the evolution of the league, there's definitely some room to change things up. Because in recent years, the NBA has basically become a year-round sport with the draft, free agency, and Summer League, so why not extend things a little more? In the world of sports, the summer has become somewhat of a dead period as the MLB regular season drags on and the NFL preseason does not start until mid-August. Why wouldn't the NBA just take advantage and dominate headlines most of the summer, especially when it can help give teams more rest? Plus, right now the offseason has way too much filler in it and those days add up. So let's switch things up a bit and begin the playoffs on May 7th. That would mean Game 7 of the NBA Finals would take place on July 10th. From there, we can cut off a day between the finals and the draft, and we don't need 8 days off between the draft and free agency. Let's go with 6. And if the Summer League ended on August 6th, which gives the league about 2 weeks before the start of preseason football, then we would end up with an additional 22 days to add to the regular season, which when combined with the changes we made in the preseason gives us 207 total days to fit in 82 games instead of just 164. These extra 43 games will tremendously help with the schedule, and it will allow the NBA to almost completely eliminate back-to-backs. And so there you have it, guys, the NBA's biggest problem that no one is talking about. Just look at those injury numbers, they're insane. Over the last 2 years, injuries in the playoffs have almost doubled. Why is no one talking about this more? So for real, I hope this video does get the ball rolling and I hope it leads to some changes. Because right now as fans, we shouldn't be satisfied with this. We shouldn't be satisfied with star players missing games with injury just because the NBA wants an 82 game schedule. There are ways around this. And other than that, guys, if you are new to this channel, I hope you subscribe. I make basketball videos like this, I do what ifs, I look at basketball conspiracies. Basically, if you love basketball, if you love the NBA, I think you'd love to subscribe. And I'd love to have you. And other than that, to everyone who is already supporting me, thank you guys so much. Still amazed at 500K, it's all because of you guys. Thank you. And as always, my dudes, have an awesome day and cue that music.
A tornado flew around my room before you came. Excuse the mess it made. It usually doesn't rain in Southern California, much like Arizona. My eyes don't shed tears, but boy, they pour when I'm thinking about you.